In a time long before the rise of kingdoms and the buildings of cities, when the world was young and full of wonders, two spirits roamed the earth, truth and deception. They were ethereal beings invisible to the human eye, drifting through the forests, rivers, and valleys like wisps of smoke. They moved together, intertwined as if they were two sides of the same coin. Truth was pure and light, her presence like a clear stream reflecting the sun's rays. Whenever she passed, clarity followed, and the hearts of those nearby felt lighter. Deception, on the other hand, was a shadow, shifting and elusive. He took the form of a dark mist, curling around thoughts and words, twisting them into shapes that concealed their true meaning. For centuries they existed in silence, their presence felt but never heard. People knew the feeling of truth, a sense of certainty and peace. They also knew the chill of deception, the gnawing doubt and confusion that followed in his wake. But without voices, truth and deception could not directly speak to the people. They were only fleeting sensations. One night, the great owl, the wise guardian of the skies, watched as the village descended into chaos. People argued and fought, unable to discern what was real and what was false. The owl, perched high in a towering tree, saw how deception's shadow had twisted the minds of the villagers, while truth struggled to shine through. With a heavy sigh, the great owl spread her wings and flew down to where the spirits lingered by the edge of the village. "You cannot continue like this," she said, her voice deep and filled with the knowledge of ages. "The people need guidance. They need to hear your voices so they can learn the differences between you." Truth nodded, her translucent form shimmering like morning dew. "I would speak to them plainly if only I had a voice." Deception grinned, his form flickering like a dying ember. "And so would I. But if we sound the same, how will they know which one of us to trust?" The great owl's eyes, wide and wise, glimmered in the moonlight. "That is the challenge they must face," she said. "I will give you voices, but it will be up to the people to listen carefully and decide which words to believe in." With a single beat of her mighty wings, the great owl breathed life into the spirits' voices. The earth trembled and a breeze swept through the village, carrying with it whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The voices of truth and deception filled the air for the first time, indistinguishable in sound, but different in purpose. The people would have to listen closely, for the test had begun. As dawn broke over the village, the people awoke to a new sensation. They could hear voices soft and melodic, floating on the breeze. At first they thought it was the wind or the rustling of leaves, but as the voices grew clearer, they realized these were not ordinary sounds. "It's a gift from the spirits," said the village elder, a man known for his wisdom and patience. He gathered the people in the square, where they listened together. "The great owl has given voices to truth and deception. We must learn to tell them apart." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The voices were indeed beautiful, almost hypnotic, but they sounded eerily similar. One voice spoke of the coming rains that would bring a bountiful harvest, while the other warned of a drought that would leave the fields barren. "How do we know which one is telling the truth?" asked a young woman named Lara, her brow furrowed in confusion. The elder stroked his beard thoughtfully. "We must listen carefully," he said. "Truth will bring us clarity, while deception will leave us in doubt." The villagers nodded, but as the days went by, it became clear that listening was not so simple. The voices of truth and deception mingled together like the weave of a finely spun tapestry. People began to argue, each believing that they had heard the truth. One day, a farmer named Doran approached the elder, his face lined with worry. "I heard the voice tell me to sell my livestock," he said. "It said a great storm is coming that will flood the pastures." "And I heard the voice say the opposite," said another villager. "It promised sunshine and a good season ahead." The elder sighed, looking up at the sky, as if seeking answers from the great owl herself. He knew the challenge they faced was greater than he had imagined. The voices were identical, both sweet and persuasive. The people were lost in a sea of uncertainty, unable to separate truth from lies. There, the young woman who had first questioned the elder, watched the chaos unfold. She noticed something strange. When the villagers listened to the voice that filled them with fear and urgency, their actions became frantic and reckless. But when they listened to the voice that brought a sense of calm, even if it carried difficult news, they seemed more at peace. She approached the elder with her observation. "Perhaps it's not the sound of the voice we should trust," she said slowly, "but the feeling it leaves behind." The elder's eyes brightened. "You may be right, Alara," he said. "Truth and deception may sound the same, but their impact is different. One guides us gently, while the other pushes us toward chaos." The villagers gathered around, eager to learn. It was the first glimmer of understanding, a small light in the darkness. They were beginning to see that wisdom was not in hearing the words, but in feeling their weight. As the voice of truth and deception continued to weave through the village, the people found themselves at a crossroads. The confusion was growing. One day the voice spoke of a river brimming with fish, urging the villagers to harvest abundantly. The next it warned of poisonous waters, telling them to stay away. Each message carried the same melody, sweet and convincing, but the villagers could no longer tell which voice to trust. The chaos came to a head when a traveling merchant arrived in the village, promising great wealth in exchange for the grain. The villagers, desperate for certainty, listened to the voice that urged them to take the deal, convincing them that it was the path to prosperity. Alara watched in silence as the people gathered the grain, her heart heavy with doubt. She could feel the unease in the air, a tension that spoke of uncertainty rather than hope. The voice they were following was confident, but it left a shadow behind, a whisper of doubt she couldn't ignore. The elder, noticing her hesitation, approached her. "What troubles you, Alara?" he asked gently. "I fear we are listening to the wrong voice," she said. "The promise of wealth feels hollow, like a sweet fruit with a rotten core." The voice that urged us to keep our grain felt quieter, but it left a sense of calm. It's as if truth is drowned out by the loudness of deception. The elder's expression darkened. "You may be right," he said, "but the people are desperate, and deception thrives in such times." Alara knew they had to act quickly. She gathered a few of the villagers who trusted her and led them to the riverbank, where she had first sensed the differences between the voices. The water shimmered in the midday sun, clear and inviting, but Alara felt the chill of deception lingering in the air. She closed her eyes, turning out the noise, focusing instead on the sensation left behind by each voice. Slowly a pattern emerged. The voice of deception was louder, insistent, filling her mind with urgency. It made her heart race, her breath quicken, as if she were being chased. The voice of truth, however, was a whisper. It carried the weight of sincerity, a quiet confidence that did not demand attention, but invited reflection. It filled her with a deep sense of peace. Alara opened her eyes, the realization dawning on her. "We've been fooled," she said. "We must stop the villagers before it's too late." Together with the elder, she ran back to the village square, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "Listen," she cried. "You are following deception. It promises wealth, but it will lead us to ruin. Trust the voice that brings clarity, not chaos." The villagers paused, her words cutting through the confusion. They felt it too, the lingering doubt that had gnawed at their hearts. For the first time, they began to understand the difference. The elder gathered the villagers around the fire that night, the flames casting dancing shadows across their worried faces. He knew the time had come for a lesson they will never forget, a lesson the great owl had intended for them to learn from the start. "We've been given a gift," he said, his voice strong but gentle. "The voices of truth and deception are here to teach us, but only if we are wise enough to listen carefully." A hush fell over the crowd as the elder continued. "I'll tell you a story," he said. "Once there was a man who set out to find a treasure buried deep within the forest. He heard two voices guiding him, one promising a path full of riches, the other warning him of dangers ahead. He chose to follow the louder voice, the one that filled him with excitement. "What happened to him?" the child asked, her eyes wide with fear. "He was led into a trap," the elder replied. "The voice of deception brought him to a pit, where he fell and was lost. Had he listened to the quieter voice, the one that had asked him to take caution, he would have found the true path." Alara stepped forward, holding the elder's hand. "The voice we hear now are no different," she said. "Deception speaks loudly, drowning out the whispers of truth. But if we quiet our minds and listen to the feeling left behind, we will know which voice to trust." The villagers exchanged glances, uncertainty replaced by a growing sense of understanding. They realized that the sweetness of deception's promises had led them astray, while truth had been there all along, waiting for them to listen closely. They decided to keep their grain, ignoring the merchant's deal. The following week, heavy rains came, and the river swelled, bringing fish to their nets. Their patience was rewarded, and the harvest was plentiful. As the sun set over the village, casting a golden glow across the fields, the people gathered once more, gratitude in their hearts. "We have learned our lesson," the elder said. "The great owl gave voices to truth and deception, not to confuse us, but to help us grow wise. It is up to us to discern the difference." The villagers nodded in agreement. Their trust in one another strengthened by the trial they had faced together. The next full moon rose over the village, illuminating the land with a silver glow. The great owl, watching from her perch high above, knew it was time to speak to the spirits once more. She flew down to the edge of the forest, where truth and deception waited. "You have fulfilled your purpose," the great owl said. "The people have learned to listen not just with their ears, but with their hearts." Truth bowed her head, a smile of pure light spreading across her face. "They have learned to see clarity," she said. "They know now that I do not demand their attention. I only offer it." Deception, still a dark mist, flickered like smoke. "And they have learned to question me," he admitted, his voice softer now. "I am no longer their master. I am merely a test they must pass." The great owl spread her wings wide, a gesture of both pride and farewell. "Go forth now," she said to the spirits. "The world will always need both of you, for there can be no truth without the challenge of lies. But from now on, the people will listen more wisely." With that, truth and deception drifted away, no longer adversaries, but companions in the dance of life. The villagers continued to live in harmony, their hearts attuned to the lessons they had learned. They knew now that the voices they heard could lead them astray, but they also knew how to find their way back. And so they taught their children and their children's children the same lesson. Truth and deception both speak, but wisdom listens carefully to know the difference. As the great owl soared back into the night sky, the world below was filled with a new sound. Not the voices of the spirits, but the quiet hum of a people who had learned to listen, not just with their ears, but with the wisdom of their souls.